Brown bringing up the fact that I wasn't reporting when I was raving about him all season long, when I was talking about him for the most of this season as a top 2 league MVP candidate, when I was pissed off and I raised holy hell on the air when he got ejected from the San Antonio Spurs game and he didn't deserve that, when I talked about him leading the pack and doing the things that he's done and solidifying his greatness as an athlete, did he complain?
Stephen A. Smith didn't just take a swing at Jaylen Brown on May 18th. He looked directly into the First Take camera and said, "Be careful what you wish for." Then he started laying out exactly what he claimed he could expose if he decided to go there. What the Celtics locker room allegedly thinks about Brown, how the organization might privately view him, how the city could feel, whether Jayson Tatum's relationship with him is as solid as it appears, sneaker deals, endorsement deals. He said the list goes on. And ESPN broadcast every word of it without a single moment of pushback. No one on that set said, "That's not journalism." No one said, "Name your source or don't make the claim." They just let the warning sit there in the air, unchallenged. And here's the part that's hard to shake. This isn't the first time Smith has reached for the anonymous source card when it comes to Jaylen Brown. He ran a similar play 2 years ago. The difference this time is that Brown called his bluff, publicly, directly, without flinching. And rather than stepping back, Smith returned with something that felt less like a television debate and more like a veiled threat from someone holding information they may or may not intend to use. At that point, it stopped feeling like a media feud. It started feeling like leverage.
I'm not going to disrespect Jaylen Brown. It's amazing to me, Jay, Big Perk, Shay, how Perk said all the things he said. You said all the things you said. Wilbon said all the things he said. Everybody said something. And I went on, I've spoken on it on numerous occasions. And you picked some 20-second clip of me talking about how Jayson Tatum showed up on First Take, but not your podcast. Stop.
So let's actually walk through what happened on May 17th and 18th, because most of the sports media coverage reduced it to two guys trading insults on television. That framing undersells it significantly. On May 17th, Brown went live on Twitch, pulled up a clip of Smith's previous criticism, and came in with both hands. He said, "Stephen A., Stephen B., Stephen C." He called Smith the face of clickbait media. He accused him of cowardice and fake journalism. And then he repeated the same offer he had already put on the table back on May 7th. He would stop streaming permanently if Smith retired. That's not the kind of thing you say in the heat of the moment. That's something you say when you've been sitting with it for weeks and finally decide you're done holding back. Then May 18th arrived, and Smith walked back onto First Take. He didn't deny anything. He didn't brush it off or redirect the conversation. He came directly at Brown. He said if he wanted to start reporting at that level, he could get into the locker room dynamics, the organization's perspective, Jayson Tatum, sneaker deals, endorsement deals, the whole picture. He even took a jab at Brown's streaming setup. "Get your ass a studio," Smith said. "You make $54 million a year. Stop being so damn cheap."
Before I even get into it, could you do me a favor, please? Get your a studio. You looking like you in some dungeon, some little room or whatever. You making $54 million a year. You're gonna make 57 next year, 61 the year after that, 67 the year after that. You're in the midst of a $304 million contract. Get a studio with a director and a producer. Calling up clips of mine, the computer ain't even working right, can't even get the full sound up in there. Get that together. That's number one. Stop being so damn cheap. You got the money.
Now pause there, because what Smith actually did in that segment deserves a closer look. He didn't report a fact. He didn't name a source. He didn't present any evidence. He simply raised the possibility that he could report something if he felt like it. That was the entire move. And that positioning actually puts Brown in a stronger spot than it might appear on the surface. If Smith follows through and starts floating whispers about what Tatum really thinks or how the organization privately feels, then he hands Brown exactly what Brown accused him of being: a media personality who uses unnamed sources to chip away at a player's reputation. He would be trying to hurt Brown while simultaneously proving Brown's argument. But if Smith never follows through, the warning starts looking like a bluff. Brown's cowardly line lands with even more weight. Either direction, Smith has something to lose. That's exactly why Brown dared him. The bridge was already burning. There was no real downside to calling the bluff. So the real question isn't who sounded tougher on television. It's what Smith actually knows, how solid that information is, and whether he can put it out there without it collapsing his own credibility in the process. That brings us back to 2024, because this piece of the story keeps getting skipped over. Smith has run this same play against Brown before. He sat on First Take and read a text message on air from an unnamed NBA source. That source said Brown is not liked. Brown carries an "I'm better than you" attitude. That is why he isn't as marketable as his talent should make him. Smith delivered it like it carried real journalistic weight. No name attached, no verification shown, just a text from someone the audience had no way of evaluating for themselves. Brown responded in the one way that cut through all of it. He wore a shirt that read "State your source" at the Celtics championship parade. That was his answer to Smith, on national television in front of Boston while the city was in the middle of celebrating a title. The two later sat down for an interview at the Celtics facility. The temperature came down. Smith even put the shirt on. But the real issue was never resolved. The source was never named. The claim was never retracted. It just lingered, unproven and unaccountable, for 2 full years. And now Smith is back in the same lane, except this time the message came with something attached that sounded less like criticism and more like a warning. Then the next layer arrived, and it made the whole thing harder to dismiss. Kendrick Perkins, a former Celtic who still has connections inside that world, went on First Take and read text from unnamed former Celtics players. One said Brown lacks accountability. Another said JB tripping. No names, no context, just criticism from people who apparently weren't willing to say any of it publicly. Perkins presented those texts like they were evidence, like they confirmed Brown is the problem, and like everyone who ever shared a locker room with him is quietly nodding in agreement. But look at what's actually missing. Not one former Celtic has gone on the record against Brown. Not one name, not one direct quote tied to a real identifiable person. So what are we actually looking at? Are these real people with legitimate concerns, or are they convenient voices helping a television narrative find its villain? And if they are real, why won't they say it themselves? Why do they need Smith and Perkins to carry the message for them? That seems to be exactly what Brown understands. Anonymous criticism can carry weight, but it can also function as a shield, a way to damage someone while staying protected from any response. That pattern is what makes this entire situation feel genuinely uncomfortable. In 2024, Smith used an unnamed source to question Brown's likability and marketability. Brown pushed back. Things cooled off. Now, in 2026, Smith is doing something similar, except the tone has shifted. It moved from criticism into something that carries the texture of intimidation. Then Perkins layered in his own unnamed text, making it appear as though a broader Celtic circle was quietly aligning behind Smith's version of events. It stops feeling like a standard television disagreement and starts feeling like a media case being constructed around one player, built on voices the audience can't see and claims the audience can't verify. And Smith and Perkins both understand how this mechanism works. If the sources are named, those people have to stand behind what they said. If they can't defend it, the narrative begins to crack. So the names stay hidden, the pressure stays public, and Brown is left arguing against shadows, while viewers are expected to simply accept that the whispers are real.
For so many years, for so many times, mainstream media has been able to control the voice.
Yeah.
Mainstream media has
Yes.
always been able to control the perception on how we, as fans or critics, are able to perceive athletes. And this is what I love about social media and Twitch and whatever platforms. It cuts out the middleman.
Stephen A. Smith didn't just take a shot at Jaylen Brown on May 18th. He looked straight into the First Take camera and said, "Be careful what you wish for." Then he started listing everything he claimed he could expose. The Celtics locker room, how the organization really views Brown, how the city feels, what Jayson Tatum may or may not actually think, sneaker deals, endorsement deals. He said the list keeps going, and ESPN broadcast every word without a single moment of pushback. Nobody said, "That's not journalism." Nobody said, "Name your source" or "Don't make the claim." They just let the warning hang there unchallenged. This didn't come out of nowhere. On May 17th, Brown went live on Twitch, pulled up a clip of Smith's earlier criticism, and came in hard. He called Smith the face of clickbait media. He accused him of cowardice and fake journalism. And he repeated the offer he had already put on the table on May 7th. He would stop streaming permanently if Smith retired. That's not a random outburst. That's someone who has been sitting with something for weeks and finally decided he's done holding back. So Smith returned to First Take the next day and didn't laugh it off. He came straight at Brown. He said if he started reporting at that level, he could talk about the locker room, the organization, Tatum, sneaker deals, endorsement deals, all of it. He even took a jab at Brown's streaming setup. Get your ass a studio. You make $54 million a year. Stop being so damn cheap. That had nothing to do with journalism. That was a distraction, and Brown didn't take the bait. He stayed focused on the real point, the pattern of unnamed sources being used to damage his reputation. Now here's what Smith actually did in that segment. He didn't report a fact. He didn't name a source. He didn't present evidence. He raised the possibility that he could report something if he chose to. That was the entire move, and it puts Brown in a stronger position than it looks. If Smith follows through and starts floating anonymous locker room whispers, he hands Brown exactly what Brown accused him of being, a media figure using unnamed sources to chip away at a player's character. He would be trying to hurt Brown while simultaneously proving Brown's argument. But if Smith never follows through, the warning starts looking like a bluff. Either way, Smith has something to lose. That's exactly why Brown dared him. And this isn't the first time Smith has run this play. Back in 2024, he sat on First Take and read a text from an unnamed NBA source on air. That source said, "Brown is not liked. He carries an 'I'm better than you' attitude. That is why he isn't marketable as he should be." No name attached, no verification shown. Brown responded by wearing a shirt that read, "State your source," at the Celtics championship parade on national television in front of all of Boston while the city was celebrating a title. The two later sat down at the Celtics facility, talked for an hour, and things seemed to cool off. Smith even wore the shirt, but the source was never named, the claim was never retracted. It just sat there, unproven, for 2 full years. Now Smith is back in the same lane, except this time with a threat attached. Then Kendrick Perkins added another layer. He went on First Take and read texts from unnamed former Celtics players. One said, "Brown lacks accountability." Another said, "JB trippin'." No names, no context. Perkins presented the evidence. But not one former Celtic has gone on the record against Brown. Not one name, not one direct quote tied to a real person. So what are we actually looking at? Are these genuine concerns from real people, or are they convenient voices helping a television narrative find its villain? And if they're real, why won't they say it themselves? That pattern is what makes this uncomfortable. Anonymous criticism can carry weight, but it can also function as a shield, a way to damage someone while staying completely protected from any response. The pressure on Brown isn't only coming from Smith and Perkins, it's coming from 3 directions at once. The NBA fined him $50,000 after he said officials had an agenda following the playoff loss. That wasn't his first fine either. $35,000 in January for criticizing a referee crew, then an ejection in March. The league had been watching him for months. When Brown pointed out that he was called for 10 offensive fouls in that series, more than double any other first-round player, the league answered with a fine instead of an explanation. That doesn't feel like closure. It feels like a warning. And Smith immediately used that fine against Brown, framing it as proof that Brown needs to stay quiet. But Smith wasn't defending the referees. He was defending the league's authority to silence players who speak out. That's a different conversation entirely. Then Tracy McGrady, Brown's longtime mentor, went on record saying Brown is frustrated in Boston.
Just that one word, frustrated. That was enough to ignite rumors across every sports show. Smith ran with it, making it sound like Brown was already halfway out the door. But McGrady never said Brown wanted a trade. He never said Brown hates Boston. Frustrated could mean anything. Frustrated with the loss, with the officiating, with the media circus around him. Brown went on stream and said directly, "I love Boston. If it were up to me, I could play here for the next 10 years. Brad Stevens backed him publicly, saying Brown was nothing but positive when they spoke. But that version barely traveled. A denial never moves as a rumor does. Now look at where both men are stuck. Smith can't use his threat without taking damage himself. The moment he starts reporting anonymous locker room information, he validates every word Brown has said about him. Fake journalist, clickbait, coward. Those stop being insults and start being an accurate description of the playbook. But if he never uses it, he looks like he was bluffing the whole time. Either direction, his leverage gets smaller. So he appears to be waiting for a trade rumor to gain steam, for another fine, for Tatum to say something that can be pulled into the story. And Tatum's silence is becoming its own problem. Smith specifically named him as someone whose real feelings he could report on. One sentence from Tatum, something as simple as "we're good," would deflate a significant portion of this. Instead, there's nothing. No post, no interview, no appearance. Brown has tried to explain it charitably, but people will keep asking why Tatum, who has sat across from Smith on First Take, has never once shown up beside his teammate. Brown can't back down either. If he goes quiet now, Smith wins the narrative. His entire brand of authenticity collapses. So he keeps streaming, keeps calling out the pattern, keeps daring Smith to actually do something real. The question at the center of all of this has never changed. If Smith's information is real, why hasn't he reported it? Journalists report. They don't sit on television warning the subject of a story about what they might publish someday. Smith isn't reporting. He's holding something over Brown like leverage. And Brown seems to know exactly what he's looking at. So, is Smith sitting on something serious, or is he shaking an empty box for attention? Drop your thoughts in the comments.